Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Joanna Nelson, and I am the Strategic Programs Manager for the Economic Development Department. And today you've tuned in for EDD to give you an overview of the statewide economic development strategy, or the plan, otherwise known as Empower and Collaborate, New Mexico's Economic Pathway Forward. Before we get started, I did want to share a couple of logistics with you. This presentation is being recorded, and we will post this online to our YouTube channel. We will also send out the recording to all the registrants along with the PDF of the presentation. We did receive your questions when you registered, so we'll do our best to address those as well as any live questions that you have. If you do have questions come up while the presentation is going, feel free to type those into the questions box that you can see on the right hand of your screen. There's a gray horizontal box, and feel free to type as many questions as you have. I also put in the chat a link to our website, as well as the site that you can find the state plan documents, eddstateplan.com. And then also there is an email, eddstateplan@state.nm.us, that you can send any feedback, any questions additionally as well. We'll do our best to address those. I wanted to take a little bit of time and share some reminders for folks while we have your attention. Fund It, the next meeting, this will be the last meeting of the year, is coming up, and the deadline to apply for that group is November 29th. And you can access the application at newmexicofunded.org. And then also the Business Recovery Grant Program is quickly coming to a close. So you have until December 6th to apply for that. And you can find all relevant documents and information at nmfinance.com. And I wanted to take one more opportunity to share with you our weekly wrap up. And if you are not signed up for this newsletter that we send out weekly, this is a great opportunity to find news and hear about grant opportunities, financial opportunities for businesses and communities. So you can sign up right at the homepage of our website, and every Monday you will get many updates and opportunities in your inbox. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our Deputy Secretary, John Clark, and try to get a different screen to share. So John, you want to get started?
Great, thank you, Joanna, and thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I think as we head into this presentation, we should start first by remembering where we were 18 months ago and what we've all been through in that time. And I think we all remember where we were in March of 2020 when the world changed. For EDD, we were preparing a ribbon cutting at the new NBC Universal Production Hub in Albuquerque. A day before that, if offices and businesses closed, workers and students were sent home, sports, entertainment, and live gatherings were canceled. And we know that the toll has been horrific. 750,000 deaths in the United States, now over 5,100 in New Mexico. It's gone up just since we made this slide. And those are lost connections, lost opportunities, and lost lives. And I don't think anyone on this call doesn't know someone that was horribly sick or who died during that time. The past 20 months hasn't been easy. We've had some of the worst and some of our best days. We had to figure out who was in our bubbles, who were the people that really mattered and the people that we needed to take care of. But there were good times too, along with the tragic experiences. Now, going on to slide 3, just quickly. So the word pandemic comes from the Greek words pan and demotic. It means all, it is inclusive, it is belonging to or of all of the people. And this pandemic really has affected everyone. Whether you get vaccinated affects all the people. Whether you feel well enough to go to work affects all the people. And whether your supply chain is disrupted affects all the people. Many with resources and skills have done better financially during the pandemic. Many of us have done just fine, but it's the disadvantaged communities, disadvantaged people in the state without the same level of access to skills, healthcare, and broadband who have suffered. And we know who these people are. and those people who were critical workers during this time. And just think about some of the pay that they get paid to go through that experience. Grocery store workers, $24,000 a year, janitors, $28,000 a year. It's important to keep in mind some of these pay levels when we think about what they were asked to do, what they voluntarily did during that time and are still doing. Communities that were reliant on retail and in-person services suffered as these industries were hardest hit by the pandemic. Communities with strong economic-based industries, however, rallied quickly and even saw expansion. EDD has never been so busy with manufacturing companies wanting to come to the state. But the whole picture of the economy has been a very real reminder that as a society, we are intertwined socially and economically. And we heard this over and over again during the strategic planning process. We keep hearing that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. We know from the data that we looked into as part of this study that the gap is growing. And the extra bad news for New Mexico is that our wage rates in the state are not tracking with other states. So it's our people who are the ones that are getting left behind. So, are we going to come out of COVID better than when we went into it? Are we going to reset and take a moment and think, what can we do better personally? What can we do better as a community? And what can we do better as a state? We all know how New Mexico is ranked in the past. New Mexico ranks 36th in the amount of patents generated. New Mexico ranks 46th in per capita GDP. New Mexico ranks 45th in the number of business establishments per 1,000 people. And New Mexico ranks 47th in per capita income. New Mexico also ranks 41st in the value of total exports. So how can we use this moment to reset, to change our course, and to build upon some momentum that we have? How can we as business owners, state officials, EDOs, chamber members, and legislators be part of the solution? We think that recovery and growth can only happen with the full support of the community that surrounds us. We need our friends, our neighbors, our surrounding businesses, hospitals, and hotels to move forward, because it really is about all the people if New Mexico is going to thrive. And EDD saw an opportunity during this weird time to do something that we've never really done before, a 20-year strategy for the state, not just for the Economic Development Department, not just for state agencies, but for the state as a whole. And we also recognized the opportunity to fund this through federal dollars. So we applied for and were granted a $1.5 million EDA grant for recovery efforts and this economic plan. So here is the state game plan. It's called Empower and Collaborate, New Mexico's Economic Path Forward. We knew that this needed to be a statewide initiative, so we reached out to hundreds of organizations to help us. We worked closely with department agencies such as Workforce Solutions, Indian Affairs, and MNERD. We heard from industry leaders, local governments, the COGS, and economic development agencies across the state to share their perspectives. And what you're seeing is a list of some of those stakeholders. And all of these groups and others, and all of you who have joined us today, will be instrumental and valuable partners as you provide a regional perspective, a rural perspective, and an urban perspective. It's all over the board. And they and all of you will continue to be instrumental as we move forward with this plan, because this isn't set in stone, and we're going to continue updating it. So let's dig into the plan a little bit, and I'm going to turn it over to Joanna to cover the core analyses.
Thank you. All right, so digging into the approach and gaining an understanding of where New Mexico's potential lies, our research fell into 4 core analyses. We looked at a SWOT analysis for each of the targeted industries. We looked at the assets that are key for growth within our rural and urban areas. We also did an assessment of the state's economy. And fourth, we looked at the innovation ecosystem. These different approaches are the real backbone to understanding New Mexico's issues, trends, weaknesses, and the strengths. They help us pinpoint what is holding us back and how we can move forward. In terms of the SWOT analysis, we understand that a more resilient economy is a more diversified economy. New Mexico already has a strong asset base in 9 targeted industries. These are the areas that our contractor, SRI, helped identify where we already have an established ecosystem the talent pool, and that gives us a head start when competing against other states. These are job-rich occupations of the future. These are economic-based sectors that are growing quickly and more resilient to downturns. So let's go into a few of these and highlight some of the things that we found within these 9 targeted industries. And I do want to remind you throughout the presentation that you can go back to the plan, obviously, and read in depth the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that we found for each of the sectors. But here we have aerospace. And as you can see here, we have a great asset we know in Spaceport America. It's not just Virgin Galactic anymore, but lots of smaller innovative companies that are here because of NMSU, New Mexico Tech, and the rich history of aerospace in New Mexico. But there is competition. We're aware of that. Many of the aerospace companies favor proximity to open water. So we need to work together to make this industry succeed. And as you can see here, the average salary is $124,000. Biosciences. Clearly, a great deal of research takes place in this sector, and we have many opportunities in identified specialty areas like those reliant on advanced computing, which we are rich in. Governor Lujan Grisham has designated UNM as a center of excellence in biosciences. NTX, a homegrown company out of Lanel, has landed in Rio Rancho and is hiring 116 employees to develop and manufacture vaccines and pharmaceuticals using mRNA and protein technologies. So a lot of exciting activity in this space. And then we move on to cybersecurity. This is one of the fastest growing of the target industries. And you can see here an average salary of $97,000. Film and television. We know the sector is booming and we need to continue to invest in workforce training and development so we can sustain this demand and this activity we're seeing for the decades to come in the future. We have much competition with now 32 states offering incentives in this field. Netflix is another billion of outside money that's looking to come here. Global trade. We have had success bringing companies to Santa Teresa, and we need to continue and build on that effort. This represents a tremendous opportunity as global companies look to bring manufacturing back to the US to diversify their supply chain. We recently signed an MOU with Taiwan, and much of the expansion down south is happening from Asia. This does not happen without marketing. Intelligent manufacturing. We have seen several companies recently start or locate here to take advantage of our competitive business climate and logistical advantages. Some examples are Jabil and Albuquerque, Intel, Blue Halo. Those are just some high overview pictures. Outdoor recreation, a natural industry for our state that we all know can thrive with more investment and a strategy that can be impactful for our rural communities. We must also ensure the longevity of our resources with conservation planning and investment. One of the first deals that was supported through Outdoor Rec, Earth Traveler, that builds the lightweight pod trailers, is an exciting company to watch as they are getting started. Sustainable and green energy. The Renewable Energy Transition Act made New Mexico a leader in our commitment to live and do business carbon-free. Our Cabinet Secretary, Alicia Keys, recently traveled to the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow with Governor Lujan Grisham, and they reported back that New Mexico is one of the places to be for companies that want to develop and invest in innovative energy technologies. Value-added ag and sustainable ag. This is one of the oldest industries that New Mexico has, And it's more important now than ever as we work to maintain jobs and expand opportunities outside the core metro areas. It's an old industry that needs new and young talent. Some recent deals to highlight are Saputo Cheese and LC and Las Cruces and Bueno Foods. Oops, there we go. The second analysis we did was to map our state assets, and these are identified as being key to development. So we looked at 5 areas: governance, physical infrastructure, environment, quality of life, and the economy as a whole. We reviewed each one and focused on the perceived and real advantages and impediments. We also looked at each of these from an urban and a rural perspective because we know that they can vary widely across the state. This is really the bulk of the report and worth looking at, but within these categories, a few things are worth noting, and I'm just going to highlight some notes here. So 44% of New Mexico renters are cost burdened, 22% severely. Broadband connectivity in New Mexico is driven by household income. Despite so many opportunities to recreate, our life expectancy is lower than most of our neighboring states. Our K through 12 system is seeing improvements, and we'll need to look into that further. But still, the lack of poverty tax revenue statewide lessens resource for K through 12. We lost almost 10% of higher ed enrollment during the pandemic, much higher than the peer states, our workforce pipeline. And again, I'll take another reminder, share another reminder that you can find that analyses, that assessment in the documents that you can find at this website that you can see on your screen. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Deputy Clark, and let you share your screen.
Thank you, Joanna. If you'll make me the presenter, I should be able to share my screen here. Here we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. So I want to show you our website here. We recently completely revamped our website. The website address is edd.newmexico.gov. I know Joanna put that in the chat. Thank you, Joanna. One of the things we focused on with revamping our website was trying to make it much easier to find information. Previously, you often had to go through a dozen click-throughs to find what you were looking for. Hopefully, it's now much simpler to find what you're looking for. And for the statewide strategic plan, you can see that link right here on the bottom of the main page. And if you click on that, it opens up this landing page where it has a little bit of intro information. And then if you scroll down a little bit, here's where you can download the executive summary, which is about 20 pages, or the full statewide strategic plan, which is over 400 pages. You can also sign up for more information about the plan or EDD news right here. And then below that, it has information on the plan, but we're going to go through this in a little bit more detail. So what I really want to scroll down to are these graphs. I do recommend that you visit our website and check out these graphs because most of them are interactive and you'll be able to dive deeper into the data that you're interested in. But this first graph shows the lost decade of job growth that New Mexico had following the Great Recession. And what this graph compares is New Mexico job growth with job growth in the rest of the country. And everywhere that you see a green dot, that means our state had better job growth than the rest of the country. And everywhere we see a red dot, we fell behind. And as you can see, during the 2000s, New Mexico generally exceeded the rest of the job growth in the rest of the country. But then as we exited the Great Recession, we fell behind and we stayed behind for close to a decade. If we scroll down, we can see the individual graphs for New Mexico and the US. And you can see that New Mexico's job growth nearly flatlined for a significant period of time after the Great Recession. And it actually took us over 11 years to finally exceed pre-recession peak employment levels. If you look down at the rest of the country, you can see that job growth was steady and significant over that time period, and it only took a few years for the US to regain its pre-recession job numbers. Down here, this graph on the left shows that it was not just a lost decade of job growth, it was a lost decade of wage growth. If we were to extend this graph out another 30 years to the left, it wouldn't look any different than what you see here. Essentially, we know that New Mexicans have always made less money than the rest of the country, but we never gained, never fell further behind. We always stayed with that same gap. But following the Great Recession, you can see that the gap grew and New Mexico fell farther and farther behind. We had very stagnant wages, whereas the rest of the country continued to move forward. What you do see here that was a glimmer of hope is that in 2019, we actually gained some ground. In that year, we exceeded the wage growth in most of the rest of the country. But then, of course, the pandemic hit. Now, here on the right-hand side is the other significant issue of why we knew we needed to do this plan in the first place. It's our dependence on revenue from oil and gas. Being dependent on any one industry for such a large share of your state revenues is disconcerting because it makes you really susceptible to the boom and bust cycle of that industry. And as we all know, the oil and gas industry is susceptible to severe boom and bust cycles. But also what you can see here is you can click through years and you can see that over time, we became more and more dependent on this one industry. So that over the last few years, about a third of our direct general fund revenues come from oil and gas. Now, if we scroll down, we knew that New Mexico was falling farther behind the rest of the country in terms of job growth, wage growth, but we wanted to take a look at how New Mexico was doing on a county level. And so that's what this graph shows. And again, if you go to the website, you can click on any of these counties and see what the average pay level is, what's the percentage of employment in that county. And again, you can scroll through over time and look how we're doing as the years pass. But what you see is that over the last 20 years, whether you look at pay levels or employment levels, you see growing disparities across the state. So it's not just that New Mexico as a whole has fallen farther behind the rest of the country. We know that we have growing disparity here at home. And then this graph on the right is another look at that same data. These blue bars show the average annual incomes of people in the top 5 counties in the state, and the red bars show the average annual incomes of people in the bottom 5 counties. This gray shaded area is the difference between the two and uses the scale on the right. And you can see that over the last 20 years, there have been growing disparities between the top counties and the bottom counties in the state. This graph on the left shows that not only did we have a lost decade of job growth and of wage growth, but we also had a lost decade of entrepreneurial growth. This shows net new business openings. It's all the business openings minus all the business closures. And you can see that in the 90s and in the 2000s, we had really significant job growth and business growth. But then for 12 years, heading into the Great Recession and then coming out of it, we had flatlining numbers and we didn't see growth in businesses. One of the things that we looked into as part of the study was why that was. And there were a number of factors, and we'll get into some of them, but we wanted to highlight one with this data, and it's per capita venture capital funding. And again, you can click through and look at how New Mexico performs over the years. But what you'll see again is that as the years pass, New Mexico falls farther and farther behind our peer states. We also have data not here in this graph, but in the plan to show that New Mexico also fell farther and farther behind the rest of the country when it came to per capita venture capital funding. So it's not just that New Mexico is a smaller state. It's not that Texas, Arizona, and Colorado have more people. On a per capita basis, we have less venture capital funding, and the problem has gotten worse. And that makes it harder for companies to start here, makes it harder for them to grow here. So we know that we have a lot of issues to tackle. A lot of these issues arose over the last decade following the Great Recession. But now the issue is, where do we go from here? what's the path forward? And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joanna to start talking about that path forward.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Clerk. And all right, you should be able to see the screen. And we'll get into the vision and the foundation of this plan. So the state has never before undertaken such an extensive planning effort. And now's the time to really come together with more collaboration and innovation and working together to look at public policies that can support these efforts. The vision, as you can see on your screen, is New Mexico will have a diverse and robust economy that engages local talent, cultivates innovation, and delivers prosperity for all New Mexicans. And this is the vision. This is the vision for 2040, up to 2040, and it really takes all of us to make that happen. So how do we do that? This is a large document that EDD just dropped out into the public. I think in total, with all of the analyses and the action plan, it's about 400 pages. But it's important to understand how we're going to implement it. And it's not an easy task. So it's a good thing to kind of, as an overview, look at the framework and understand how it's set up. And so within the report, we have the action plan. The guiding force of that action plan are the strategies that you can see right under the vision. And then within those strategies, we've highlighted about 3 to 4 priorities within those strategies. And then from those, we've got the actions. And these are really the recommendations, not only for EDD, not only for our state agencies, but also our stakeholder partners, which includes public sector, includes nonprofits, it includes business leaders. This is really the how we're going to do this. And so here's the 6 strategies that were identified from the research and the assessments. These are all based on the findings. So if you can't get into all of those analyses, you can start here and recognize that these strategies are pulled from the challenges that were identified in those documents. So we have modernize economic development ecosystem, strengthen communities, reimagine education and training, economic justice and equity, enable innovation, and diversify the economy. So what we'll do is high level go into each one of these strategies and highlight some of the priorities that were identified. And so looking at how do we modernize the economic development ecosystem, we're already taking steps to do this, to modernize and increase collaboration. We're reaching out to have regular meetings with ED partners and stakeholders. We've revamped our website, and this is hopefully going to help us coordinate better with our stakeholders, with the public, with New Mexico Partnership. And the governor has recently signed an executive order to streamline regulations. And we want to boost the capacity of our regional planning councils and councils. So moving on to strengthen communities. EDD is proposing to assist local government expertise and economic capacity. We're asking to double our army of regional reps, and I know you've heard the analogy. These are the boots on the ground. These are the technical experts around the state in rural areas. We currently have 6 and are needing and asking for 12. We're looking to beef up and to build up the partnerships between outdoor rec businesses and downtown areas in Main Street to leverage outdoor tourism and increase downtown revenue. When we think about reimagining education and training to better prepare the workforce, EDD's economists are working with higher ed to track degree programs to ensure higher ed is more responsive to industry needs. we will be seeking more engagement with businesses so we can map programs that align with those skills that industry needs. And we've started this on two fronts. One, with a program to develop outdoor rec leadership skills. And secondly, we're proposing a new film academy where students who want to enter the industry will be properly trained and receive mentoring and internships with our film studio partners, Netflix and NBC Universal. For economic justice and equity, EDD is taking actions to be more inclusive and reach out to minority communities. And we're proposing a new Office of Justice, Equity, and Diversity and Inclusion under EDD as a governor's priority in the upcoming legislative session. And we want to allocate more capital to tribal and minority communities as well as rural businesses. And we recently announced last week that the state has received another round of EDA grant money for $1 million to help carry out some of the priorities in this strategic plan. And one of those is to work with Indian Affairs Department to hire a professional economic development coordinator that can work directly with tribal communities on priorities that they identify. With this money, we can also help to fund Newmark, the regional planning, with regional planning efforts to be a statewide hub to fund a comprehensive border plan and continue to work on the state plan website for the SEDS. And that's that website that Deputy Clark highlighted, that we can continue to improve and place informative information and data for our communities there. So enable innovation. We're all about innovation. EDD will be asking for recurring investment in a statewide business incubator ecosystem, allowing EDD to deliver even more assistance virtually. We want to better coordinate the work of the incubators so they can nurture more startup enterprises, bring resources online, and expand assistance to underserved areas. And so finally, that last strategy, how do we diversify the economy? We know diversifying our economy is key to our economic well-being. We have been working closely with industry leaders to identify their needs to better align programs and services. And we're exploring creating industry councils to help us better coordinate and understand the needs from each sector. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Deputy Clark.
Great, thank you, Joanna. So we know that we can't do this alone. And so I want to talk about what our call to action is. We have a few. The first call to action is for our business community. We're asking for business support in the following areas. Businesses need to adapt to rapidly changing times. They can't pretend that things are going to go back to exactly where they were. And they need to prepare to accommodate workers with greater schedule flexibility, better benefits, and higher wages. This is how we're going to grow our labor force and better compete. Now, the other side of that coin is we need to make sure that if we're asking our labor force to pay our residents better, we need to make sure that we're providing them with employees who have the skill sets that they need. And one thing that the plan uncovered for us was just how mismatched those skill sets are. As a state, we're not doing a great job of training our workforce for the skill sets that our industry needs today and that our industry needs tomorrow. So we all need to work to articulate what the business community needs from our workforce, and then work to align our learning with the job-rich, higher-paying occupations and where we have the greatest needs. The higher education department and all of our institutions of higher education need to better align learning with those job-rich, higher-paying occupations that we're targeting. And that means they need to communicate more, we need to communicate more, and industry needs to communicate more. Higher education institutions need to use more data-driven economic information in making curriculum decisions, and we're already starting to work with Higher Education Secretary Rodriguez to make this happen. Businesses also need to incorporate more hands-on paid internship opportunities to build their workforce, and EDD needs to be more active in assisting with this, with paid job training and to expand employment opportunities. And finally, we also need to encourage businesses to support local chambers and partnerships that support economic development. The next call to action is for policymakers. We need to make major changes to our economy. We know that. We saw those graphs showing that we can't wait to take action and that significant action is needed. But policymakers need to recognize that major changes to the economy will require significant funding for economic development department and economic development programs across the state. Our next call to action is building capacity. So how do we do this? How do we make sure that we can start making some of these changes? Well, part of that is budget requests. And so for this next session, we're asking for $30 million for our LEDA projects to help businesses here expand and help recruit new businesses to the state. But we're also asking for something new. We're asking for $50 million in LEDA to help build critical infrastructure that's needed in local business and industrial parks across the state. This will help get business and industrial parks shovel ready, because we are competing with a lot of states that not only have available land that already has all the infrastructure to it, but often already has available buildings. And so if we don't at the very least have shovel-ready sites to show clients, then they're not going to consider us. Also, we're asking for $12 million in JTIP for job training, and we're asking for $4.5 million in marketing funds. EDD has never really had marketing funds to speak of, but in order to make these changes, in order to attract these target industries to the state, we know we need to go after them. Many of these companies don't know New Mexico exists, or if they know that we exist, we're not at the forefront of their mind when they're thinking about where to expand or where to relocate. So we need to market heavily to them. The state does a great job of marketing to the leisure and hospitality industry, but really we need to step it up and market towards these other 9 industries that we're targeting as well. And finally, we're also asking the legislature for $10 million in Main Street capital outlay for projects across our state in our beloved downtown business districts. And I think it's important to point out, in asking for additional resources, and going back to Joanna mentioning that we're asking to double our regional reps team from 6 to 12, to take a look at where our department has been in terms of staffing. A little over a decade ago, we had 70 FTE, and now we're at 52. We're being asked to do so much more, and we desperately want to do so much more. And we had a record-breaking year in FY21, but we want to do even better, and we know that we can. But at this point, our staff is frankly overwhelmed with what they're already doing. And in order to keep moving forward, and in order to reach out to communities across the state, businesses across the state, we need more staffing. So we're asking the legislature to increase our FTE numbers from 52 to 65. And we really want to ask your support to help us with that, because if we want to avoid another lost decade of job growth, we need to invest in New Mexico, and part of that is building economic development capacity. So as you can see here, we have labeled the strategic plan as a roadmap to greater economic security for all New Mexico families, and we cannot continue on the same path that we've pursued in prior years. This plan provides a new path forward, and the state must now provide funding and take action. This is the first phase of the plan. We haven't heard from all the people and the groups that we want and need input from, and we'll be doing annual updates. The first of which has already begun with meetings of the Sustainable Economic Development Task Force and Advisory Council. This Task Force and Advisory Council will be responsible for overseeing our annual updates to the plan each year for the next 5 years. And this is part of how we're going to make sure that this plan doesn't just sit on a shelf. This Task Force and Advisory Council is made up of cabinet secretaries from a slew of different agencies, but it's also made up of community leaders, tribal leaders, business leaders, community activists, people who really have a devoted interest to making sure that we can update this plan, make it relevant for everyone, and figure out how to roll it out to our communities throughout the state. So please join us, support us, and we'll head down a new path all together. We need a coalition of stakeholder support for this. So thank you very much, and I think now we're going to move to questions. So first, taking a look at some of the questions that came in as people were signing up for this. One question is, our rural communities confront declining aging and declining populations. Is there a path to revitalization? Yes, there is, and it's not one thing. I think what you'll hear from us time and time again is there's no silver bullet. There are a lot of things we need to work on simultaneously. Our rural communities are definitely confronting declining aging and declining populations, but that's also an issue for the state as a whole. We're seeing fairly rapid growth in our retirement age residents, but we're seeing declining growth in essentially our workforce age residents. And there are a number of things we need to do about this. One thing is we need to make sure that, as I said earlier, that we don't have a mismatch of skill sets. If we're educating our students for a career that doesn't exist here, or giving them skill sets that aren't needed here, then they're going to go out of state. And so we need to make sure that we are training our students for the needs of industry today and for the jobs that we're recruiting for tomorrow. So part of that is that mismatch and working with economic development, higher education institutions, and industry. Part of that as well is making sure that we're doing a better job reaching out to our rural communities and rural businesses. That's partly why we're asking to double our regional reps team from 6 to 12. Our regional reps are team members who live out in those communities. So they're out talking to those community leaders, talking to those businesses, finding out what they need. But also, that's part of the goal of the Sustainable Economy Task Force and Advisory Council. Part of their goal is figuring out, how do we take this plan, which was developed for the state level and for the regional COG levels, and make it relevant to individual communities and how to actually implement it at that level. Another question that we got is, would you expand on housing and environmental justice as economic development priorities? So as Joanna mentioned, affordable housing is an issue. We have a significant portion of New Mexicans who are cost burdened, which means that they are spending more than 30% of their gross income on their housing. Now, part of that in some communities is just affordable housing. We know that some of our communities across the state have very expensive housing. As a state as a whole, our bigger issue is pay levels. When you look at housing costs across the state, compare it to peer states, we actually compare very favorably. We know that we have problems in some communities, but across the state, that's not the issue. The issue is that as housing just gets more and more expensive because of construction costs and because of inflation, pay levels haven't kept pace. And we know that from that graph earlier that New Mexico is falling farther behind, and some counties in New Mexico are falling farther behind. So that's something that we're really paying attention to. And for every project that we work with, we take a look at what's the average pay, what are the benefits, and not just what's the average pay, but what's the average pay compared to the existing pay levels in that community. And that's something that we track and that we report out to the legislature and to the public in our quarterly reports. But that's also going to take a lot of funding. It's going to take funding for our regional reps. It's going to take funding for our business incubators. We're requesting $800,000 for our business incubators, partly to help the businesses that are in the communities in which those incubators are located, but also partly to extend the reach of those business incubators across the state. And in terms of environmental justice, that's one of the focuses of the Sustainable Economy Task Force and Advisory Council, is how do we take into account that the economy is rapidly changing, the world's rapidly changing. And now in these times, if you want to attract some of the largest businesses in the world, if you want to attract Ford or Google or Amazon or any of a number of other major companies in the world, you have to provide them a path towards carbon neutrality. If you can't do that as a state, they're not going to consider you because they've already made commitments to their investors to be carbon neutral. We have another question. How do leaders plan on addressing the topic of gentrification and displacement? How do we keep our unique flavor while developing? And that's really important as well. We don't want New Mexico to become generic. There's some wonderful things about New Mexico. We have wonderful, local characteristics across the state. And so that's part of, again, what the Sustainable Economy Task Force is charged with, is how do we roll this out at the community level while keeping our unique flavor? So if you have any recommendations for how we can do that successfully, how we can encourage development while not becoming cookie cutter, please let us know. Again, Joanna posted that email address. It's eddstateplan@state.nm.us. If you have any suggestions, recommendations related to the plan and how we move forward with it, please email us there.
And I
Another
did
question.
put,
I'm sorry, go ahead,
sorry
Joanna.
to interrupt. I did put that the Sustainable Economy Task Force, if you're interested in reading that bill, it's Senate Bill 112, and I'm putting the link to where you can find that bill if you want to learn more too.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Joanna. Another question we had is, how do you plan to bring other stakeholders in economic development together for collaboration and include a lens of climate impact in the work? So that's a big part of this, is we need to be collaborating. We need to all be moving forward in the same direction. And again, that's part of the goal of the Sustainable Economy Task Force, is to bring everyone together, to bring cabinet secretaries along with representatives from local groups, communities together to figure out how do we all move forward together. And again, lens of climate impact in the work, that's one of the focuses of the Sustainable Economy Task Force. It's mentioned in that legislation, Senate Bill 112. And then here's another question that we got. What are the biggest moves we can make to ensure we don't fall behind neighboring states in these key industries? I think the two biggest things that we can do right away are doing a better job of workforce training. And again, that's going to take a lot of information sharing from our educational institutions and getting input from our industry leaders and input from economic developers to make sure that curricula are being developed with the needs of industry in mind. And the industry has a voice in how students are being trained, what technologies they're being trained on. But also, we need to make sure that we're investing in marketing. Again, we essentially have no marketing dollars right now. We're asking for $4.5 million. That's a lot, but the state needs to make some major changes in order to move forward, and that's one of them. Joanna, I don't know if you saw any other questions that come in that you wanted to answer, either in the initial questions or here in the chat.
Sure, I think you addressed most of them. There were a few questions about how do stakeholders get involved? How can we help? And shout out to TJ Cook and Warren Unsicker, some great partners. One of the questions that I think we got from the food depot was addressing, let me pull this question up. And sorry, I'm getting messages from another meeting happening. So if you're seeing that on your screen, sorry about that. But there was a question of how does this plan fit into the work that's being done to address hunger issues? And I did kind of want to piggyback off of what you said of that need to be working together. I know that we have been working with the food and hunger coordinator at the governor's office, who is in the midst of creating a plan of action of how to really create some activity to address those issues around hunger. And I think that's an example of how we're participating in weekly calls with them, which is a bigger group of many organizations that are addressing hunger, even though it doesn't fall directly right in the wheelhouse of economic development. It does affect the work that we're doing. And so we're just working very closely with them too. And I know they contributed to the state plan as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then I wanted to highlight one other thing too, is the question about how does this effort and how does this work, how is it affected by the threat of climate change? And one of the plans that is brought up in Senate Bill 112 that was brought up by Representative Rubio when she worked with Senator Stewart on creating SB 112 was the plan that DWS did around jobs and the clean economy. And so I'll put a link to that plan as well if you're interested in researching that more. That's got some great data and assessments, and they definitely pertain to this work too.
Great, thanks, Joanna. And again, as Joanna mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box and we'll be happy to answer them.
I did, John, there's Lisa Ackley is on the line, and she brought up that the great work that they're doing with the Centers of Excellence in Cybersecurity. And I wanted to give a shout out to them and all the work they're doing to support that industry too.
Wonderful, yes, thank you.
Are you able to see the questions, John, that are coming up?
No, I haven't seen any questions come in.
Okay. Warren Unsicker was asking about the marketing funding that you highlighted. Specifically, if you could shed some more explanation of how that is going to support the New Mexico partnership.
Sure. So that's funding that we would use to essentially advertise in New Mexico. So that would be a joint effort for the state that would benefit us. It would benefit our work with the partnership. We are separately asking for additional dollars for the partnership. That would be more for staffing and for going out to trade shows and visiting companies. But for actually advertising the state, that's the $4.5 million that we're asking for. $500,000 of that is specifically set aside for marketing related to international trade, because we know that now we have this great opportunity to try to focus on companies that are looking to reshore operations. $1.5 million would be for general EDD marketing and advertising for our 9 target industries. And then the other parts of it are kind of split between recurring and non-recurring. Those two that I already mentioned, $1.5 million for general EDD marketing, $500,000 for international trade. We asked for those in our recurring budget because we really need those every year. But we also asked for an additional $1.5 million as a special appropriation because we haven't been able to do advertising or marketing, because we haven't had the dollars for it. We need to make a big push to start getting our name out there, start getting businesses to consider New Mexico. So we're asking for $1.5 million on a recurring basis, but also $1.5 million as a special appropriation. And then finally, we're asking for a total of $500,000 for outdoor recreation marketing. Half of that is in the recurring budget, and then the other half is as a special appropriation.
Thank you. We got a few questions that you touched on them a little bit, but maybe need a little bit more explanation for folks that are asking what initiatives are in place to support the companies that are here, specifically maybe smaller Main Street size businesses, but looking at retention compared to asking businesses to relocate here.
Sure, there are a number of things where the plan addresses this and where we have budget requests related to that. Again, part of that is our regional reps team, making sure that we have boots on the ground to talk to these businesses and get them the help they need. Part of it is asking for additional funding for businesses. One of the things that we didn't mention was the funding that we're asking for related to our proposed JEDI office, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion office. We know that historically minority businesses have had more trouble accessing capital, and so we're asking for $2.25 million to be able to provide financial help to those businesses. And that's also something that we're focusing on with federal money that we're going to be getting, is how do we use the federal money to help our local businesses, and especially those historically disadvantaged businesses. But again, we're also asking for $10 million in capital outlay for Main Street. And Joanna, I don't know if you want to briefly talk about, we already do have some funding opportunities for small businesses that are, for example, struggling to get loans. Do you want to talk about the collateral assistance program?
Sure. I love talking about the collateral assistance program because one of the challenges with that program is creating awareness around it. But we do have a program called the CAP, and that enables us to purchase CDs, certificates of deposit, to help with collateral deficiencies. So if a business is going into a bank, let's say they're a startup, maybe they just need operating capital and they don't have a lot of collateral or assets that the bank is looking for to reduce their risk, especially as things are uncertain with the pandemic. They're looking to collateralize a big chunk of that loan. Our businesses struggle with coming up with the needed collateral. So we're able to step in and say, okay, up to 50% of needed collateral, we can come in and purchase a CD. We can actually put that CD in the bank to act as collateral. So it's not an additional loan to the business, but it is basically a guarantee to the bank saying if this loan defaults, you can take a portion of our CD. So that is available, and not a lot of people know about it. We need help creating awareness and promoting that program.
Great, thank you, Joanna. And also, I think in answer to this question is something that you mentioned at the very start, which is the Nmfa recovery grant. So again, you have 2 weeks as a business to apply for these grants. You can go to the Nmfa website, and this is grant money. It does not have to be repaid. It's up to $100,000 per business. The average grant size per business has been $50,000. And essentially, your business just needs to have 75 or fewer employees per location. So it's focused on small businesses here. And it needs to show some sort of decline in revenues and some sort of decline in staffing during the pandemic. So if you had a drop in $5 in revenues, but you had to lay off a couple of people and you're looking to bring them back, this grant is for you. If you had to completely shut down operations and had a dramatic loss in revenue, and you're just struggling to bring back those employees because you're struggling to get the funding to do that, this grant is definitely for you. So 2 weeks left in this program. It's free money for the state, devoted to companies who struggled during the pandemic and are trying to rehire and just need some financial help doing so. Go to the Nmfa website. Please get in your application. And I'll mention as well that while the Nmfa recovery grants are essentially on a first come, first served basis, it looks at this point like we're not going to hit the maximum amount. So if you apply and you qualify, you'll get the money.
And we can put the links to not only NMFA's site, but to the collateral assistance program, and we will send those out.
Perfect.
And I think I'm reaching the limit of my 3-year-old attention. So I'm going to turn it over to you, John, to wrap it up.
Well, thank you, Joanna. And again, we really appreciate all of you joining us this morning. But again, the conversation doesn't end here. We want to continue to hear from you. We would love your support. We'd also love your continued feedback. Again, that email address, eddstateplan@state.nm.us, if you ever have any other thoughts. If you want to talk to us about how you can help support us, please reach out to us. One of the biggest ways that you can help support us right now is to contact legislators and encourage them to support our funding requests. We just had our LFC budget hearing last week, but now our budget is going to be going before the House Appropriations and Finance Committee in January. So if you are willing to support us, please reach out to members of HAFC, reach out to the chair, Patty Lundstrom, reach out to the vice chair, Nathan Small. Let them know how important this economic development funding is to you and to your community, to your business, to your organization. So thank you all so much for joining us, and please stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.